do better pronouncing than I did for the Kiddush prayer. Okay. This is the story of Purim. It is sometimes called the Feast of Lots, but often called the Feast of Esther. Purim is the Jewish feast celebrated each year to remember the amazing events that transpired in the kingdom of Ahasuerus of Persia in approximately the 6th century BC. It's an amazing story, not only because it's true, but because plans to destroy every Jewish person in that kingdom were halted by the Almighty God. The God of Israel miraculously intervened in what appeared to be a hopeless situation and saved the Jews of the kingdom from certain death. There are 5 primary characters in our story: King Ahasuerus, Queen Vashti, Mordecai, Queen Esther, and the wicked Haman. To begin the story, let me introduce these 5 characters. 2 of them will need your help. King Ahasuerus. You should recognize him even from afar. Rather distinguished looking, don't you think? Notice the noble chin, the deep-set eyes, the big crown, but not really of royal blood. He bought his position, so they say. He used to be a stable keeper. Ahasuerus has chosen Shushan as his capital because of the Jewish craftsmen who lived there. He wants a palace modeled after that of the Jewish king Solomon. This is Ahasuerus' wife, Queen Vashti. She's the one with the royal blood from the family of King Nebuchadnezzar, his granddaughter. Ahasuerus' only really claim to the throne stems from Vashti, and they both know this very well. She continually reminds him of it. He married her thinking she would add validity to his kingship. She's got a pretty big crown too, and thinks it ought to be better than his, if you know what I mean. Some of you may recognize the Jew Mordecai. He's a godly man of the tribe of Benjamin and often sits by the gates of the city. He is the wise and kind uncle in our story who gives help to his cousin. He is well respected by all. He was exiled from Israel by King Nebuchadnezzar years ago. And then there's Esther. A beautiful Jewish girl with a destiny. She's our heroine. Esther needs your help. Because tradition says that every time you hear Esther's name, you cheer. So let's try. Every story has a villain. In this one, it's this guy, Haman. He's a rich man with no principles. We need your help here because tradition says that every time you hear the name Haman, you boo or stomp or use your voice. He's from the nation of Amalek. Maybe you remember when the Jews left Egypt and were crossing the wilderness. They had to fight against the people of Amalek. As long as Moses' hands were raised, the children of Israel prevailed. So Aaron and Hur held up Moses' arms, and they defeated the people of Amalek. We begin our story in chapter 1 with King Ahasuerus holding a great feast. His wife, Queen Vashti, was also holding a banquet for the women in the king's palace. King Ahasuerus was a man of great wealth and power. Everyone in the kingdom bowed to Ahasuerus, from the greatest to the least, from the wealthiest to the poorest.
He's the king, and he doesn't do a thing he's everybody should shine for. Well, he's the king, and he doesn't do a thing he's everybody should shine for. It doesn't matter if I'm weird, and I party half of the year, 'cause I'm the king, I say it's everything I'm everybody should shine for. Well, he's the king, and he doesn't do a thing he's everybody should shine for.
We see that all was merry in the kingdom, but on the seventh day of the feast, the king became extremely upset. Why? Because he had requested that Queen Vashti come to show off her beauty, but she refused.
First, I'm going to tell you about Vashti, my ex-wife. She was very lucky that I didn't take her wife. All I did was ask her to party in the house. When I threw her out, I didn't mean her any malice. Well, he's the king, and he doesn't do a thing he's everybody should shine for. Well, he's the king, and he doesn't do a thing he's everybody should shine for. It doesn't matter if I'm here, and I party half of the year, 'cause I'm the king, and the king I said everything I'm everybody should shine for. Well, he's the king, and he doesn't do a thing he's everybody should shine for. I never like to go to parties when I'm the only woman there. When I said no to Ahasuerus, I really didn't really care. He threw me out, I could not be first lady anymore. I don't know what became of me. I'm not the queen no more. I was divorced. That's not the voice. I was replaced with Esther's face. I told the king, there's one bad thing. I don't want to eat my meals with 100 men who deal in the matters of the royal family. He wanted to show them my lovely face. I didn't feel like dressing up in satin frills and lace. Perhaps it was a pretty silly thing for me to do. No woman wants to be a single act. How about you? I was divorced, that's not the voice, I was replaced, she was replaced. Esther's face, I told the king, she told the king, it's one bad thing, I don't want the king's suggestions to give me bad indigestion in the matters of the royal family.
trusted the king, but also all the princes and the people of the kingdom. So they recommended that a new queen be found to replace Vashti. So his advisors began the search for another queen for the king. Now, in the palace of Shushan, there was a certain Jewish man named Mordecai, a Benjamite, who had been carried away from Jerusalem in the Babylonian captivity. And Mordecai raised up Hadassah, his uncle's daughter, who was called Esther. She was very fair and beautiful. A search began in all of the provinces for a girl who would please the king and become queen instead of Vashti. Many girls were assembled in Shushan, the capital, to be brought before the king. One by one, Haggai leads the girls before the king, who finds Esther to be the most pleasing before him. None of the other young ladies obtained such favor and approval from him. So the scripture tells us the king loved Esther above all the women, and she obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti.
Well, she's a wonderful woman. She's brilliant and sweet. Ask anyone in Shushan, any Jew on the street. They will tell you that Esther, best of them all, good old Esther, love of all.
But in the midst of all this joy, there was treachery and deceit brewing within the kingdom. Two individuals were planning to assassinate the king. Fortunately, Mordecai learned of this evil plot and told it to Queen Esther, who, in turn, told it to the king in Mordecai's name. Thus, the criminals were caught and hanged on a tree. We will learn that God allowed this near tragedy to occur, ultimately to prevent a much greater tragedy in the kingdom of Ahasuerus.
Mordecai, you're wonderful, wonderful. Mordecai, you're marvelous, marvelous. Mordecai, you're so handsome and
reason that is not told to us in Scripture, King Ahasuerus brought honor and advancement to a prince named Haman. He was above all the other princes, and everyone in the king's servant bowed to Haman and revered all the king's servants except Mordecai. So Haman had the servants cast lots before him every day, beginning in the first month, the month of Nisan, when Passover is celebrated, until the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, which is this month on the Jewish calendar. And Haman determined that he should do this diabolical deed this month, in the month of Adar. So, Haman had a terrible decree written and sealed it with the king's ring. The decree said that,
first of all, we should shave off the king's beard, shorten his nose. Thus, he will lose his personality. That all Jews, both young and old, like little children and women, should be destroyed, killed, and caused to perish in one day. On the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar, and their possessions taken away. All able-bodied people should be ready to attack the Jewish people on that day.
when Mordecai heard about these terrible deeds, he rent his clothes and put on sackcloth with ashes, and went out into the midst of the city and cried with a loud and bitter cry. And in every province, whithersoever the king's commandment and his decree came, there was a great mourning among the Jews, and fasting and weeping and wailing, and many lay in sackcloth and ashes. And Esther sent a messenger unto Mordecai to find out about the dilemma.
Listen to me, O messenger of Queen Esther. Go back to her and speak these words. I charge you to go in unto the king and make supplication unto him, and to make request before him for your people, that he would spare the lives of the Jewish people. Go quickly, messenger, to the queen. Go, go.
What a message to come from Cousin Mordecai! Oh, messenger, go back to him. Go back to him at once and tell him that everyone knows that a person just can't go speak to the king on a whim. For if anyone, even I, the queen, were to come to the king in the inner court when I haven't been called by him, why, I could be put to death according to the law of King Ahasuerus. Oh, my only hope. My only hope would that I would have such an invitation would be if the king were to hold then would I be allowed to live. But I have not been summoned to the king in the last 30 days, a month. Why he doesn't want to see me yet? Oh, go to Mordecai.
O messenger, return to your queen and tell her these words. Think not with thyself that thou shalt escape in the king's house more than all Jews. For if thou altogether hold thy peace at this time, then shall enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place. But thou and thy father's house shall be destroyed, and who knows whether you are come to the kingdom for such a time as this. Go back to the queen.
Oh, messenger, return to Mordecai and tell him this. Go, gather all the people, all the Jews that are present in Shushan, and fast to me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days. Night or days. No food. I also and my maidens will fast too. And so then, only then, will I go to the king, which is not according to law. And if I die, I die. Go to Mordecai.
Without a plan, without a scheme, and after she had fasted, Esther went to see the king. She could have gotten blasted for visiting old King's Eve without an invitation. All she wanted was to say, "Can you please save our nation?" Well, she's a wonderful woman. She's brilliant and sweet. Ask anyone in Shushan, any Jew on the street. They will tell you that Esther is the best of them all. Good old Esther, tell them all.
Now it came to pass after 3 days of fasting that Esther put on her royal apparel and stood in the court of the king's house, over against the king's house. And the king sat upon his royal throne in the royal house. And when the king saw Esther, she obtained favor in his sight. And the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. So Esther drew near and touched the top of his scepter. She invites both Ahasuerus and Haman to a feast, laying a trap for the wicked viceroy. At the banquet, Esther invites the two men to a second banquet to be held the next day. In the meantime, Haman went home that day joyful and glad in his heart. But again, as he passed by Mordecai at the king's gate, Mordecai would not stand up or honor him in any way. So Haman decided to have gallows 75 feet high made, and he determined to ask the king the next morning that Mordecai be hanged there. That night, strangely enough, the king could not sleep, and he commanded that the book of the records of the Chronicles be read before him. And in the reading, Ahasuerus heard and was reminded that Mordecai saved the king's life by revealing a plot against him. Thus the king proclaimed,
What honor and dignity has been done for Mordecai for this? Nothing? A man saves the king's life and nothing is done in return for him. This must be rectified immediately. Who is in attendance in my court? Haman? Haman, call him in.
Now Haman, the prime minister, was my man until he started hassling the Jews in Shushan land. Tried to change his attitude about the Jewish nation. We gave him candy and we tried behavior modification. Well, he's the king, and he doesn't do things everybody should know. Well, he's the king, and he doesn't do things everybody should know. It doesn't matter if I'm here and I party half of the year. I'm the king, I taste everything. I'm everybody's Shushan boy. He's the king, and I don't do things everybody's Shushan boy. Now Mordecai is wonderful. You know, he saved my life. I took his lovely cousin, Esther, for my wife. Mordecai is Amos, the hero of my guild. Save the Jews and save the king. Got Haman the gorilla. Well, he's the king, and he doesn't do things everybody should know. Well, he's the king, and he doesn't do things everybody should know. It doesn't matter if I'm here and I party half of the year. 'Cause I'm the king, I taste everything. I'm everybody should know. Well, he's the king, and he doesn't do things everybody should know.
Now, Haman was come to the court of the king to ask that Mordecai be hanged on the gallows that Haman had prepared. But the king spoke to Haman first and said,
What shall it be done to the guy, the man who the king delights to honor? You
Now
know about this.
Haman, thinking to himself, assumed that the king was trying to praise Haman. So Haman responded,
For the man that the king delights to honor, let the royal apparel be brought that the king likes to wear, and the horse that the king rides, and the royal crown, and have one of the king's most noble princes bring them to the royal, to the man that you would be like to honor. And have that man ride on a horseback through the streets of the city and proclaim before him, Thus shall be done to the man whom the king delights to honor.
and the king responded,
David, what a wonderful idea. Quickly, I call to you, go take the clothing and the horses you said to the man I wish to honor, Mordecai the king. Now.
So Haman was forced to do exactly as the king had said and brought honor to Mordecai the Jew.
Behave.
You got something to say there, Canaan?
Oh, he's all good.
Good. I
Come on. Come here. All right, here we go.
Dashing through Shushan, on a horse that is the king, very royal,
people. And Haman returned home mourning and having his head covered. And when Haman reached home, Zeresh, Haman's wife, and all of Haman's wise men said to Haman,
We can see that you have begun to fall before Mordecai. If Mordecai is indeed of the seed of the Jews, you will not prevail against him, but you will surely fall before him.
Then the king's servants came to Haman's home to bring him to Esther's banquet.
Now Esther is my lovely queen. She asked me for a meeting. And Haman, the prime minister, she said as we were eating, that Haman might hurt all the king. I told her not to worry. I told her to continue eating my delicious curry. Well, he's the king, and he doesn't do a thing. Everybody should shout out. Well, he's the king, and he doesn't do a thing. Everybody should shout out. It doesn't matter if I'm here, and I'm already halfway here. 'Cause I'm the king, and the king I sit down, and everybody should shout out. Well, he's the king, and he doesn't do a thing. Everybody should shout out. Well, he's the king, and he doesn't do a thing. Everybody should shout out. Everybody should shout out. Everybody should shout out.
King Ahasuerus and Haman came to the second banquet of Esther the queen.
Get out of my way.
Excuse me.
Well, she's a wonderful woman. She's brave and sweet. Ask anyone in Shushan, any Jew on the street. They will tell you that Esther, the best of them all, good old Esther, the queen of love all. As you know, the story goes that King Ahasuerus invited Haman, Esther too. They all made a toast. Pretty soon, as they were eating, Esther told the king, Haman wants to do the do's of daddy with his king. Well, she's a wonderful woman, brilliant and sweet. Ask anyone in Shushan, any Jew on the street, and they will tell you that Esther is the best of them all. Good old Esther, the queen of love all.
And the king said again to Esther on the second day of the banquet,
What is your petition, Queen Esther? And it shall be granted to you. What is your request that will be performed, even up to half my king?
If I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my life be given to me at my petition, and my people's lives as well at my request. For we and my people are sold. I and my people to be destroyed, to be slain, to be annihilated.
Who is he that dare presume in his heart to do such a thing?
The adversary and the enemy is this wicked Haman.
Well, Haman was found out at last. There was a dinner scene. His hanging choked on his dinner. Esther spilled the beans. Esther told the king, oh, Haman won't get off our case. Now, Ahasuerus, don't you think this man is a disgrace? Well, she's a wonderful woman. She's brilliant and sweet. Ask anyone in Shushan, any Jew on the street, and they will tell you that Esther is the best of them all. Good old Esther.
Then Haman became exceedingly afraid before the king and the queen. And the king arose from the banquet table in great wrath and anger and stormed into the palace garden. Now so frightened was Haman that he threw himself upon the bed where the queen was reclining, so as to beg Esther for his life before the king.
My name is Haman and I know we're not the best of friends. I would like to talk to you and try to make amends. I want you all to understand my position clearly. And I want for me, you have no celebration here.
Just because we didn't bow to you, you're a rat. Oh, Haman, you need to learn a different way. We cannot listen to your Michigan's another day.
But when the king returned, he saw Haman lying upon the queen's bed and exclaimed,
Oh! Will you force yourself upon the queen right here in front of my own eyes in my own house?
At these words, the king's servants covered Haman's face and informed the king that there were gallows 75 feet high, which Haman ordered to be made to hang Mordecai the Jew.
Hang him on! Hang him on! Get him out of here!
Just because we didn't bow to you, you're a rat. Oh, Haman, you need to learn a different way. We cannot listen to your Michigan's another day. We'd like to tell you, Haman, if you were a little mellow, we wouldn't have to put the noose around you on the gallows. Now if someone should invite you for some coffee in the dark, you'll have to say no thank you. I think I'll be right out. Oh, Haman, you are a pain in the neck. Just because we didn't talk to you, you're a rat. Oh, Haman, you need to learn a different way. We cannot listen to your Michigan's another day.
I know that I am arrogant and I won't use my way. I certainly have learned that every dog will have their day. I know that Jews won't welcome me and ride me up the wall. I'm humble and insensitive and I'm no good at all. When I was the prime minister, my subjects would bend over. Everyone was doing it, Spock and Nigel Rover. Everyone would bow to me but Mordecai the Jew. Some people who fall down would be steadily to left.
Now, Haman, you're a pain in the neck. Has lots and lots of secrets that can use on his neck. Oh, Haman, it's that Haman that you thought you'd never see. You're really quite Michigan and you're all your dreams.
So Haman was hanged on the gallows that he had constructed in his own house in order to kill Mordecai. And on that day, the king gave the house of Haman, the Jews' enemy, to Esther the queen. And the king took off his ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai. And Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. And Esther spoke yet again before the king, and fell down at his feet, and sought with tears that he stop the terrible things that Haman the Agagite had determined to do to the Jewish people.
If it please the king, and if I have found favor in his sight, and if things seem right to you, O king, and I am pleasing in your eyes, let it be written to reverse the commandments devised by that wicked Haman to destroy my people the Jews, who are all in all your provinces. For how can I endure to see the evil that shall come upon my people? Or how can I endure to see the destruction of my people?
Behold, I, the king, cannot, or anyone cannot reverse a rule that I, the king, have set forth in Persia, but I can give Mordecai the ring. You can write new letters, and you can seal it with my seal. But for anything written in my name and sealed with my seal, it cannot be reversed. So go, sign the letters.
So Mordecai commanded unto the Jews and to the lieutenants and the deputies and rulers of the provinces from India unto Ethiopia, 127 provinces, and to every people in their language, the following letter in the king's name and with the king's seal. The king grants the Jews which are in every city to gather themselves together and to stand for their lives, to destroy and to slay and to cause to perish all the power of the people and the province that would try to assault them, both little children and women, and to take their possessions from them for booty. All this may happen on one day, namely the 13th day of the 12th month in the month of Adar. The Jews should be ready on that day to avenge themselves against those who would have oppressed and killed them. And when these commands came into the provinces, the Jews had light and gladness and joy and honor and a feast. And many of the people of the lands became Jews for fear of what would happen to their enemies. Now in the 12th month, the month of Adar, this month, on the 13th day, when the day of the decree was drawing near, the Jews gathered themselves together in their cities throughout all the provinces of the king Ahasuerus. And all the rulers of the provinces helped the Jews, because the fear of Mordecai fell upon them, because Mordecai became greater and greater in the king's house, and his fame went to all the provinces. And the Jews smote all of their enemies who had sought to destroy them. And the king said to Esther,
Yay! The Jews have slain and destroyed 500 men in Shushan, the palace. But what about the 10 sons of Haman? And what about the rest of my provinces? Now what is thy petition? And it shall be granted thee. What is your further request? And it shall be done.
If it please the king, let it be granted to the Jews, which are in Shushan, to do tomorrow also according to this day's decree. And let Haman's 10 sons be hanged upon the gallows.
And the king commanded that it be done. So the 10 sons of Haman were hanged on his gallows. Now the Jews that were in Shushan gathered themselves together on the 14th day of Adar and slew 300 men at Shushan. But they did not take their possessions for booty. But the other Jews that were in the provinces gathered themselves together and stood for their lives and had rest from their enemies and slew of their foes 75,000. But they also did not take their possessions as booty. On the 13th and 14th day of Adar, they rested and made a feast day of gladness. Therefore the Jews of the villages that dwelt in the unwalled towns made the 14th day of gladness and feasting, a good day, and a day of sending portions to one another. And Mordecai wrote letters commanding that all the Jews establish among themselves that they keep the 14th day of Adar and the 15th day as feast days yearly. For it was a month that was turned to the Jews from sorrow to joy and from mourning into a good day, a day of feasting and sending portions and giving gifts to the poor. These days are called Purim, because Haman cast the pur, that is lots, to destroy destroy the Jews. But this day was not ordained as a feast for the Jews only. For as it says in the Holy Scriptures, the feast day was ordained for all the Jews, and for all people who joined themselves to them, for Jewish and Gentile people who loved God's people. And so King Ahasuerus declared the greatness of Mordecai. For Mordecai the Jew was second only to the king himself, and great among the Jews, and accepted of the multitude of his brethren, seeking the wealth of his people, and speaking shalom to all his seed.
My name is Haman and I'm
16.
Our next performance will be at the Sight and Sound.
Here it is.
Thank you very much. We trust that you enjoyed this. It's all to the glory of our Lord. If you would like some autographs, you can meet everybody.